Hello and welcome to Vision Denial. My name is Sam, and if you're new here, I've watched every single playoff game of summer 2022, yes, all 383 games, and I cover every single day of Worlds, and we're on the second day of group stage. We've got some interesting drafts, some very close games, some not so close games, and honestly, fairly solid Worlds so far. Been really appreciating it. A lot of these particular videos have highlights of or reviews of what I do will be put onto TikTok. If you want to follow that, the link is down below. Otherwise, let's just get into it. Yeah. Our first game of the day is Rogue, the first seed from the LEC versus DRX, the fourth seed from the LCK. This was fairly clean out of Rogue. Neither team played with confidence or proactivity for the first half of the game, something that kind of surprised me. Or what surprised me more even though, was the lack of coordination that came out of DRX. Every attempt at a play felt like the others would, like every other member would be too slow to respond. The vision play and especially vision denial from Rogue gave them the angles to play around DRX, and corralling them into terrible positions for these neutral objective fights. I do think the tempo play from them is very slow, but they didn't give any chances for DRX to come back and suffocated them from resources, making any attempt for an engage even worse. Solid approach by Rogue, and DRX, I hope you don't see that and choose to put Pioshik in. Please, no thank you. My MVP for this game is Odoamne for his zoning tools, saplings, and just regular annoyance that he was. Our second game of the day is Evil Geniuses, the third seed from the LCS, versus G2 Esports, the second seed from the LEC. Much stronger draft from G2 on this go around, while Evil Geniuses opt for something similar that was played yesterday. The lack of proactivity on both sides only helped G2, and yet they were still way more proactive, allowing them to nullify any approach to neutrals or turrets that would be usually Evil Geniuses' forte. I'm wondering when Evil Geniuses will take something that doesn't require such an early lead, because the rest of their approach to this game was solid, from neutral play perspective to vision and wave management, and it was fairly excellent overall. But the lack of damage, pressure, and gold meant that G2 was always going to hold the advantage during fights, and with the map pressure applied. My MVP for this game goes to Broken Blade, who wound up holding Impact stuck in the top side of the map, unable to provide the needed utility to have Evil Genius' game plan stabilize when behind. Our third game of the day, we have Fnatic, the third seed from the LEC, versus T1, the second seed of the LCK. I need to stop seeing drafts that require heavy early game advantages with limited engage tools. Come on, guys. T1 pulled it off yesterday, but today, Fnatic called their bluff and outplayed them on the situation, saying that there is no way we give you the space to get the gold for this to work. Both sides holding solid vision approach and neutral play, but T1 just didn't respect Fnatic skirmishing, and neither solo lanes could move around the map comfortably to aid the bot side of the map. Fnatic, for their part, take a simple approach to the draft, gain a hell of a lot of space and tempo, and slowly controlling the pace of the game. I do think how they played out was a little too slow, and if it wasn't for T1 constantly trying to find angles of attack and fumbling those attempts, they could have had scaling issues, but not by much. Fnatic with a stronger approach to the win conditions, ballooning of their leads, and team fighting netted them a win against an opponent that no one expected them to beat. My MVP goes to Elyoya, who nullified any attempts at an early game approach that could have been accrued by owner. Our fourth game of the day is Edward Gaming, the LPL's third seed, against Cloud9, the LCS's first seed. This was Cloud9 drafts something that requires a huge lead early game, is not simple to execute, and winds up fumbling completely, which is a trend for group stage, it seems. The lack of engaged tools against a draft like Edward Gaming's meant that the mid game from Cloud9 were waiting on a huge mistake from their opponent, really. And we did get a few glimpses of what it would look like, but it seems like no matter how you spun the situation, Edward Gaming were going to control the game from second to one. Edward Gaming still showing solid applications of vision play, wave manipulation, team fighting. Some parts of their neutral setup are a little dicey. Regardless of the fact, it's really solid to see Edward Gaming bounce back from their loss that they had yesterday to make a convincing showing today. My MVP for the game goes to Scout, who nullified Jensen and created a magnet on him that Edward Gaming played super well around. Our fifth game of the day is Top Esports, the LPL's second seed, versus GAM Esports, the VCS's first seed. I'm honestly not disappointed by either side on how they played. GAM came in swinging with a strong opening and had an angle to get a lot for this game. But the fight in the South Quadrant leading to a 4-0 created a scenario that would be impossible to come back if Top Esports played correctly for the rest of the game. Which they did, increasing tempo, ballooning gold, full control of vision, and making sure to suffocate what was available and possible. GAM, for their part, always kept looking for plays that increased their odds of coming back into the game, and many of the angles looked solid, but as time passed and gold difference got larger and larger, properly ballooned, the fights just became too difficult to really play out. Solid game, super happy to see GAM back on stage, and that Top Esports with a strong opening can prove why they were considered the likely probable first, if not for a fumble. My MVP goes to Tian, who, with the one play to dispel the engage from GAM and re-engage on them, created the game state that ballooned so hard. The final game of the day does not disappoint, with Damwon Gaming, Kia, the third seed from the LCK, and JD Gaming, the first seed of the LPL. My goodness, this was the closest game I have ever seen in my life without it going to a crazy long 50 to 60 minute drag fest. Damwon do a heck of a lot in the early to mid game to really push JD Gaming to their limits with some solid vision, much stronger neutral approach, clever skirmish angles. But for every play that Damwon did, JD said, "Cool, let me show you how I do it." And in some moments it's worse and others better. One thing's for sure, JD was more proactive in the mid to late game stages and much stronger in the neutral vision and wave management at that point. That doesn't stop the fact that this is the best I have seen Damwon perform in a late game scenario in a very long time, to a point where I was almost convinced they were going to win it. My MVP for the game goes to 369, who created a large problem for Damwon when Nuguri could not provide the utility for their teamfight angles because he shut him down playing a losing matchup, all while providing a whole lot of zone control. Honestly, from the day itself, I always only have a couple of thoughts, but the first thing that comes to mind is draft priority and not understanding your limits, and primarily the lack of like engaged tools, of proactivity, the lack of like freedom of movement in and of itself. Teams will draft things without any engage tools, frontline, or even scaling opportunities in the event that their approach or their game plans for the early game don't fall through, or do fall through, but don't like follow through, which is really unfortunate because they have some interesting drafts who can go into different like some solid positions, but require so much gold really early in. And like this is not just, oh, the weaker teams are trying to do something super spicy. T1 was doing this yesterday. A lot of teams were doing this, and we're finding more and more that the trend and success goes towards the teams who pick scaling, who pick frontline, who pick engage options and mobility tools, things that are able to provide neutral setups in a convincing manner. And I'm almost frustrated to see that if it lacks damage, if it lacks engage, if it lacks frontline, if it lacks something so fundamental and core to the ability of making sure you get those neutrals, that you're able to close out games, that you're able to play out the mid game, because you want to do something that can get you a whole lot of gold ahead early if done correctly. If you're going to want to play that way anyways, why not just still pick the scaling options and play that style? And is there something missing to this equation? Like, have your Akali, sure, but make sure you have opportunities and availabilities to really supplement the Akali with extra stuff. You want your Jax? Cool. But don't have it with like such a weak amount of utility in every other position where there's no crowd control to speak of. There seems to be a solid lack of understanding of how to draft something almost for the sake of matchups or for like an idea of how to like approach the mid to late game if you have the ideal setup, which is super annoying. Otherwise, I do think, however, that this is still a lot more competitive in terms of like early days. Usually there's a sense of impending, oh no, this is 100% who are the favorites after the first 2 to 3 days. Like the first half of groups is always impended with or upended with the idea of like, well, goodbye to these teams. Because like I look at the results from North America and I see that there's no wins at all. And most times people would go like, well, I think that means it's the end of North America in this situation. There's nothing they can do to come back. But the thing is, however, is that they're still playing in a way that I could see them still coming back. Like historically, they go even-ish. Some teams just bomb right out of the gate. But no individual team feels unbeatable now. Some teams feel very difficult to beat, right? JD Gaming and Top Esports have proven that to be the case. Edward Gaming, Fnatic, and T1 have made it clear that Group A was way closer than I thought. Some people were rumoring that this was like a close group, which to me was nowhere near the case. There was like a lot more inconsistencies with some of the teams than others. But it seems that some of the inconsistencies seems to be shored off, making it a lot closer. And what was a open and shut case with the Group D has become a lot more questionable and open. So there's a lot more competition, and I appreciate that this wasn't just like, oh, play-ins is super competitive. Now we get groups is also competitive. Now I just hope that the teams actually follow through with good drafting. That's all I ask for. There needs to just be some solid drafting. For the love of God. Please. But those are my thoughts, at least, from the observations, from the stats that I'm following. I want to hear what you have to think in comments down below. Do you think it's doomed for North America? It's doomed from every other team except for like the top Chinese and Korean teams? Or do you have the same idea that this seems a lot closer than initially anticipated? And that's great. Or do you also agree with me in terms of like the drafting? Like, do you think that some of the crazier picks or some of the picks that would require a lot more execution heavy styles are like good to stay, like it has its place? Or do you think no, it has to go away completely? Any and all thoughts I would love to hear in the comments down below. And if you like this kind of content, I've got little playlists here for all of the teams that to qualify if you want to get a short notice or a short review of what they're like, or all the other videos I've made about Worlds so far. I appreciate everybody who watches. It means a lot to me. And we have day 3 to look forward to. With that, I'll see you all next time.